Dear viewers, blind gardener sounds like an oxymoron. Honestly, after my vision loss, I have treated gardening only as a concept. But our guest today, Debbie Armstrong, has shattered all my limiting beliefs about gardening. She's not only an avid and passionate gardener, she's a tech expert, she's a pet therapy volunteer, she is a transit advocate, and she has had a stellar career supporting the dyslexic students. Starting with a tantrum over the hard Braille lines and ending with nurturing life in her garden, in her backyard, she has figured out that all good things often start hard. But she is unstoppable. She has been breaking down all barriers and redefining boundaries. This is Sudha Rajagopalan from Access Braille, your podcast host for the series Beyond Sight, Beyond Limits. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really captivated by the fact that you have been able to apply the dexterity of your fingers and tactile ability, if there's a word like that, to starting from Braille, cooking, knitting, gardening, and technology. But today, can you please take us first to your primary schooling?
So I was in elementary school in Custer Valley, but before that, when I was 3 years old, my mom got a Braille writer. Well, it was really a little too early for a 3-year-old to learn Braille. So my mom went to a Braille class and she learned how to be a Braille transcriber. She was all fired up about me learning Braille. And so when I was 5, I went to an ordinary kindergarten. I walked to school with other kids. The only difference between me and sighted kindergartners is that my parents required that I always walk with a little friend. So they took turns. Someone from my neighborhood would always come to my door and meet me, and we would walk to kindergarten together.
That's nice.
So that was the only requirement. I went to a regular kindergarten. I went to primary school at an experimental, well, it was a regular school for ordinary sighted students, but I was part of an experimental program to mainstream blind students. This was before it became regular in public schools for blind students to be mainstreamed. And so we had a special teacher that came in and taught the blind students Braille while the sighted kids were learning art. So when sighted kids did their art classes, I had my little Braille lesson. But I also had my mom at home who could transcribe Braille, and so she would transcribe things for me to practice reading. She had always read to me. My mom and dad loved to read out loud to me, so I was all fired up too about literacy. And I want to tell you my favorite Braille story, which was that when I was about 6, I was reading a really good story, and it was in double line space Braille, and that means that there's always a blank line between each line of Braille. And I got to the really good part of the story, and the teacher had transcribed the rest of it in single space Braille. And that was harder to read because you tended to want to touch both lines at the same time. And so I pitched a little fit. I got on the floor, I kicked my legs, and I screamed, and I said, I don't want to read it like this. And she said, well, if you want to finish the story, you're going to have to learn to read single space Braille. And I did, not because of her, but because I had to find out what happened. And so I did learn to read single-space Braille by the time I was in the 2nd grade. So that's my Braille story, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, thank you for that story, Debbie. And after your primary schooling and all that stuff, what did you do? You finished your high school and then?
Yeah, I was also taught how to type. My mom also reinforced that. So by the time I was in the 3rd grade, I was also a very good typist on a manual typewriter. So I was able to go to middle school and high school as a streamlined student. When I got out of high school, I did not want to go to college. All the adults were like, I got to go to college. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So I really wanted to be an exchange student. I was okay with going to college, but not quite yet. I wanted what I think the Australians call a gap year. So I applied to 10 organizations to become an exchange student, and I was rejected because I'm blind. And this is long before the ADA and civil rights and all of that. I'm 69, so all this stuff is happening back in the early 70s. And I applied to the Rotary Club, and I went and spoke at the Rotary Club and showed them some of the tools I used and some of my skills, and they accepted me, and I became an exchange student, and I lived in Germany for a year as an exchange student. And I went to the 13th grade. In Germany, we have 12 grades here, but they have 13 in Germany.
Wow. And so by the time you have learned to use mobility, the cane and all that stuff, or how did you manage there all by yourself?
Well, I was actually kind of shocked because at that time in Europe, and that's not true anymore, but at that time, blind students were learning only how to use like a short support cane. They weren't using what we call the long cane technique. And so my cane skills were actually considerably better than most of the blind students I met there. I was able to go downtown and shop on my own and explore on my own, and many of them were much more limited, and that was kind of sad. That's no longer true anymore, but they were just a little bit behind us. I had gotten mobility training in middle school and high school, and that was also during the periods when the sighted students were doing art and other visual activities.
But when you went to Germany, you were all by yourself, right?
Oh yeah, I was all by myself.
And then you flew by yourself, and then somebody picked you up from there. I mean, how did they orient you to wherever you had to stay and where you had to go to school on a daily basis?
Well, I was living with a host family that already knew that they were getting a blind student, and they were fine with that. And so, my host family had already been selected for me. So they, met me at the airport and, helped me learn my way around their house and stuff. I found getting around their town was a little more challenging because they didn't have like grid intersections like we did. So and then I discovered that I wasn't going to be allowed to go to public school. I had to go to a school for the blind. And then once I got there, of course, people all knew how to orient and help blind people, so that wasn't really a problem.
So after your adventure in Germany, what happened?
Well, I came back home and I went to community college, and then I went to UC Berkeley for a while, and I studied literature and journalism. And
And did you want to become a writer? Is that why you took literature?
Yes, I really, really wanted to be a journalist. And unfortunately, UC Berkeley phased that major out and turned it into mass communications. And that was a big disappointment to me because I wasn't interested in television and other I was interested in writing for a newspaper and being a journalist and traveling and all that stuff that young people want to do. But I was still studying comparative literature there.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioning that you wanted to be a translator, but you decided that was not your cup
Oh
of
my
tea.
goodness! So I had before I went to Germany, I had studied German and a little bit of Spanish, and I really wanted to be. I pictured myself as one of those simultaneous translators at the UN. We're talking about the dreams of young people. I wanted to be a translator so bad. And my parents came to visit at the end of my stay in Germany. They spent 3 weeks there with me, traveling Europe and all that. And when they were with me in Germany, I had to translate for them. And I was terrible. I was thinking in German by that point. And so my mom would say things like, tell the hotel the shower's not working. I go, blah, blah, blah. My problem was that I knew how to say things in German and I knew how to say things in English, but it was like in two different rooms in my mind. And it was like trying to say, if someone asks you to say everything in synonyms, and you have to find a synonym for every word. I was so awful at it. So sometimes we want to do something and we just don't have the talent for it.
Yeah. So then what was the next career that you were aiming for?
Well, I was just trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and especially since my major had been phased out. Oh, and I also dropped out of college because I got a really good job running a recreation program for disabled adults. So I was getting paid really well running this program, and then I wasn't in school, and then I was kind of bumming around trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life. And my best friend said to me, "You would be so good with computers." And I'm like, "Yeah, really? I don't think so." So she told me I needed to spend a month proving to myself I was good at computers. So I took the challenge. It was kind of a dare. I took it seriously. And what I did is I put a sign up on campus saying I would type for quadriplegics. And in those days, people who were quadriplegics that studied computer science had to type with a mouth stick, literally a stick they held in their mouth. And I got hired by a couple of quadriplegics, and so I would sit on the wheelchair foot pedals down in the bowels of Evans Hall where we would type on terminals, and so I'd have my hands up in the air and I'd be typing, and I'd be sitting there on their foot pedals so they could see the screen. And what I discovered is I was super good at writing code. I just mastered it immediately. So for example, one of the students I was typing for, he had to write a 4-function calculator in Fortran, and he was really struggling with it. And I like, this is so easy, just let me do it for you. So yeah, I did a kid's homework. Now on video, I've told you that I've cheated and did a kid's homework.
Now that you are working at Anza College, you understand what you were doing was not correct, huh?
Yeah, right. Now I work at a college. So so the other thing I did as a young person that's kind of unique is I wrote the 4th screen reader for the IBM PC. And a screen reader is a program that literally reads a screen to a blind person. But it doesn't just do that. It allows the blind person to work with an application so they can read by unit. They can read the previous word or the following sentence or the status bar, or they can have something spelled, or they can find out, like in Windows, what is my current focus? What is the title bar of the window that I'm focused in? So a screen reader does a lot more than just read. It allows a person to actually work with applications using the keyboard and using special commands. But in those days, Windows didn't exist. And so I started, after typing for the quadriplegics, I put an ad in the newspaper that said, blind student seeks computer for school and recreational use. And I was donated a bunch of computers. My first one was a TRS-80 Model 1, and I taught myself to write BASIC on it because by that time I'd saved up enough money to buy myself a speech synthesizer. It was a Votrax personal speech system, and it sounded just like a robot.
How did you do that?
Hello, I am an 80s speech synthesizer. Please enter your command.
Sorry for interrupting you, but how did you know that you had to use speech synthesizer?
I talked to other blind people that were working in industry and asked them how they used a computer. You know, I've been pretty active in various blindness organizations, so I had blind friends, and I knew older blind people who were older than me that were already, they were mostly COBOL programmers in those days, but I asked them how they used the computer. So I had bought myself this speech synthesizer, and I hooked it up to my TRS-80 Model 1, and I was also in a ham radio club, so if I got stuck with stuff, I could ask other, ham radio operators how to do things. And so anyway, so I treated it like a printer, and I would just print out to it. The command in BASIC is L-print. So I would print to my speech synthesizer, and that's how I taught myself how to write programs on my own without being someone's typist. And then one of the computers that was given to me was an IBM PC, and of course I couldn't really use it at the time. And there were screen readers for the PC for IBM DOS, but they were like $500, and I'm still a starving student, right? The recreation program kind of folded. It was your typical nonprofit, so I didn't have a job anymore. I'm a student, and so what I what I did is wrote my own screen reader, and the way I did it was I just kept printing the screen to the synthesizer while I was writing the code, and eventually I got to the point where it could do simple things like, read the current line and read the top line and read the bottom line, and that was good enough. And after it was able to do that, I was able to finish writing a true screen reader. But that was way before Windows. That was I think I finished it in 1983, so I still wasn't old enough to drink yet, so I was a little hackerette.
Yeah, but that's amazing that you were like a born programmer, it looks like.
I was a terrible translator and I was a good coder, so
yeah.
Our minds work in different ways. I mean, we're not all Stevie Wonder, right? We don't all have the same set of talents.
Yes. And then so how did you become a tech expert from wherever you started in the software industry?
Well, I mean, I had a variety of software jobs. Sometimes I wrote code, sometimes I wrote documentation, sometimes I did tech support. Because this is Silicon Valley and I got downsized a lot, just because that's Silicon Valley, not because of me, I got to hold a variety of jobs. I am really lucky that I've worked for both blindness companies and for mainstream companies. I worked for Stenograph. I wrote 5 product manuals for court reporters. And then I worked for Telesensory, which was a company that made products for blind people.
Yeah. That's amazing, Debbie, that you somehow had the patience and the aptitude to learn programming on your own.
Well, part of it was talent. I mean, people often think I'm really smart, but I had just discovered what I had talent for. And that's an important thing for young people to do, is to explore different things and to realize you may not be good at everything.
Yeah, like the way you did not want to be a translator, but you wanted to be a techie.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your transit advocacy role?
Well, I'm basically just really interested in improving public transportation in this area. I'm on a committee with our local transit agency. I try to give them feedback. It's not that exciting, actually. It's just an important thing to do because people often think blindness is a big limitation, but for me, being blind is not a limitation. I've worked since I was 18. The limitation is that I can't drive, that it takes me all afternoon just to go to a medical appointment and come back, and that's why I'm a transit advocate.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I know that when I started in 2011 to use VoiceOver and navigating websites, I found most of them were not accessible. But now, I think 15 years later, almost every website seems to be accessible, but there are times when they will have a button there, but it's really not a button, then I can't really click on it, and I have to ask my sighted husband to help me. But when you started to work in the tech industry, what kind of hurdles like that you had to overcome?
Every once in a while, I would run across inaccessible websites. I remember when I was working for CARE, that's CAERE, I had to work with a database that was completely inaccessible. And I think the way I got around all these things in all of my jobs is volunteering to do things for other people that I could do, so that they would do things for me that I could not do.
Oh, that is smart.
And I've been really effective at making sure I knew what jobs, and I think this is one reason I've managed to be employed so long, is I'm pretty good at figuring out what jobs nobody else wants to do that I can do and volunteering to do them. So if I volunteer to do enough stuff that other people don't want, they're quite happy to do something for me that's often much simpler, like just type some stuff in this field or look at this screen for me for a minute. So, yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful way of exchanging the skills, I guess, or our desires to do whatever we want to do. So now, can you tell a little bit more about the current job that you have at the Anza College?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for making sure that my students with print impairments have accessible materials. 80% of the students I serve have learning disabilities, they're dyslexic or have other learning issues, and only 20% of my students are visually impaired. For my learning impaired students, because I read Braille and have read Braille since I was 5. I often read out loud to them. I sometimes read their test to them. If we're getting a chapter of their book converted, I might read it to them first, if they need it right away. And so, I may scan in OCR something and then read it in Braille. But most of my job is figuring out how to accommodate a particular student's needs. And I can give you a couple of examples.
Yes. And how many students do you have to manage?
Well, right now I've only got about 30. I've had the most I've ever had is about 80, but our enrollment's down because of the demographics of Silicon Valley. But yeah, I've had as many as 80.
Yeah, if you can give a couple of examples of how you've been able to help them, that would be great.
Well, so one fun example is I have a Braille display, and I had a student who was really struggling with her iPad. She couldn't figure out how to do things on it. So I brought my iPad to work, and using Bluetooth with my Braille display, I was able to sit with her looking at the iPad and me pointing to things using Braille. So, and then I turned on the speech so it would read the word associated with the infographic on the iPad. And I would say, okay, now you just go here and you touch that. And then I would touch it on my Braille display, which was Bluetooth to the iPad, so she could see what was going on. And that's how I helped her learn how to use her iPad. Now, I had a low vision student who also had a disease which affected her bladder. And what that meant is she had to visit the restroom every half hour. And so she was very embarrassed because she would have to crawl through all the other students to get to the door. But if she sat in the back, she couldn't see the blackboard. And so this was really a dilemma for us. And so what I was able to do is acquire a video magnifier with a distance camera. And so we would point that at the whiteboard so she could see it, but she could also sneak out the back row to use the restroom when she needed to. And so a lot of my job is that sort of troubleshooting, is finding a way to help a student with a limitation. Like, for example, I had a student who could not use his hands, and we got him a puff and sip controller for his computer. So I do a lot of that kind of accommodation troubleshooting. That's my favorite part of the job.
Yeah, you can definitely visualize yourself in their shoes and make sure that they are successful in whatever they are doing. That's a great contribution, Debbie. Thank you for doing that. Now it's my favorite topic, gardening. I want to know, if I want to start gardening, what do I have to do and how do you do it? How do you keep track of what seeds you have sown and what are you harvesting? Of course, harvesting, at least you will know by touching them, but I'm curious.
Well, so I'll give you a couple tips, but I'd first tell you I started gardening when I was a starving student. And I was at a thrift store looking at an old dresser, and there was this dresser with all these kind of broken down drawers, and I think I bought it for 25 cents.
Okay.
And I lined up all the dresser drawers on either side of my entrance to my little apartment. I was living in a ratty little apartment, okay? And so I lined these dresser drawers up on either side of my entrance, and I filled them with dirt, and they didn't need drainage because they were already kind of broken. And I went, I started putting plants in them, and that's how I got started gardening. But now I've been gardening, since 1980, so I'm pretty experienced. And okay, so for sowing seeds, there are several things you can do. You can certainly mix them with coffee grounds and shake them over a space, or mix them with sand in like a salt or a pepper shaker. Yeah. I have pretty good fine discrimination, so I usually just shake the seed packet in my palm, and then I pick out seeds 1 or 2 at a time, and then place my hand over where I want to put the seed and let go of my pinch and drop the seed into the dirt. So I use Mel Bartholomew's square foot method, and you can look up square foot gardening on the internet, but that's the technique I use. And you basically divide your garden plot into squares, and certain plants fill a square in certain ways, like bush beans are 9 beans to a square, and lettuce is usually 4 heads of lettuce or 4 leaf lettuces to a square. And so when I was first getting started, I made little grids with clothesline. So I used eye hooks in my raised beds and ran clothesline through them. But now I have a raised bed and I don't bother with all of that. I know that how big a foot is, right? And so because I'm working in that unit, I always know where things are at. And I used to use Braille labels. I just put Braille labels on old pieces of plastic. But now I typically just use a spreadsheet. So for example, if I put basil in the second square from the right in the third row, that is going to be C8, for example, you know? And so looking at my spreadsheet, I always know where everything is. So if something is there that's not supposed to be there, I know it's a weed. I also would say raised beds are really important for blind people, because if you're sighted, you can see where stuff is, but if you're blind, you're going to be crawling around all the time.
Yes.
And if you're low vision, you may have to keep bending down and aching your back trying to see what you're growing, right? So my raised beds are always at waist height. And when I was younger, I could just walk around and touch everything. Now I have a folding stool because I'm an old lady. So I do most of my gardening sitting in my little stool. But yeah. Watering, sometimes I use soaker hoses, but for smaller beds, I used to just take a bucket and an old like sour cream container and just dip water into each square. And then I could tell exactly what I was watering and where it was.
So what kind of vegetables do you grow usually?
Well, I grow a lot of herbs. I've got chives and I've got basil and, oregano and all that good stuff. I don't know. I have to look at my spreadsheet. I do grow flowers, but when I grow flowers, I typically just put them in pots out front because they're pretty. So my yard's all the old rat. I've got mint that's like trying to escape out of its pot. And I've got several bunches of chives that need to be dug up and divided. And they're all in my raised bed or in pots in my yard. But all the pretty stuff, the flowers are out front in pots.
Yeah. Have you written up all of this for the blind?
I published
gardeners?
I published an article in the Blind Californian about being a blind city gardener, and but there's like an internet mailing list called Homesteading by Touch, which is for blind people that have like whole spreads, like they live off of their homestead, and I'm just a city gardener, so.
Okay. That's good. That I'm now inspired. And I know that if I study a little bit more and maybe go through your blog, I would be able to start a garden. Thank you for that, Debbie. One more activity that I can engage myself in now. I want to ask you a question, because you seem to be so immersed in contributing for the visually impaired and blind. If you have unlimited resources, unlimited amount of money, unlimited amount of people, computing power, AI power, name it, space for you to do whatever, you've got it. And what is the one thing that you would be wanting to do for the visually impaired and blind community?
I would create a series of online courses to teach math to blind students, because one of the things when I was in mainstream school and now that I see in college, math is the subject that nobody knows how to teach to blind people and that blind students really, really struggle with. There are math wizards who are blind. I'm not one of them. In fact, one of the reasons I was eager to learn to write code is so I wouldn't have to do math. I'm really good at figuring out how to tell the computer what to do. I'm not really good at doing it myself. And math has always been a big stumbling point. We have a lot of blind students who drop out of college because they can't pass the required math courses. And the teachers don't have any idea how to teach math in a non-visual way. This was less of a problem when more blind students went to schools for the blind, but they don't anymore. And so I would put together a series of fully accessible online math courses that someone could take, independently study, pass, and after that they would be able to pass any tests that let them get into university, because that is the big stumbling block for blind people to get degrees. The reason I talked about math is because it's the big barrier to getting into university. But without Braille literacy, you're not even going to be able to get into community college at all easily. And many people fail academics because they're not literate. So Braille is so important because you need to know how to spell things. And what we're seeing nowadays for blind kids, especially in the poor school districts where it's hard to hire a Braille teacher, they just teach them technology. They figure, well, the computer will read to them. They can always say, hey, A lady, or hey, S lady, or hey, Google lady, give me an answer. And that's not helpful when you need to be literate.
Yeah, it's hard for people to write their exams, right, if they don't know Braille.
That's right. It's hard to type things if you don't know how to spell. If you never read, you really have trouble getting a good education.
Yeah, thank you. And so what would be one piece of advice that you would give to the students that are in their formative years that are visually impaired and blind?
I think the most important thing to realize, well, two things. One, it's perfectly okay to fail. I failed as a translator. I have also failed in some of my jobs not to do things, either because I couldn't do them or because I procrastinated. We all make mistakes. Some failures are because you don't have talent. Some are because you're just lazy and you make mistakes. Or you're irresponsible. So A, it's okay to fail because you learn from it. And B, it's okay to think out of the box and do things differently than other people. You don't have to do things the same way a sighted person does it. Let me give you, can I give you one example?
Yes.
So I was trying to get to a store which was on one side of a giant parking lot. And every time I navigated through the big asphalt desert, I got lost and I was walking around between all the cars, never found the store. And so it was so frustrating. And I'd learned how to use my cane. I knew what I was doing, but how am I supposed to find the store from the street if there's a giant parking lot between me and it? Well, my dad was so wonderful at this stuff. So my dad took one look at the situation and he said, oh, there's a block down, there's a little sidewalk that goes right to the back entrance of the store. And the thing is, a sighted person would say to themselves, well, I don't want to walk an extra block, I'll just walk across this parking lot. But my dad, because he was my dad, he knew I could walk forever. I mean, I was young and athletic. Walking wasn't the problem. Finding the store was the problem. So he quickly realized that all I had to do was walk another block, walk around the corner, find the little driveway, walk up the little driveway, and I'd be at the back entrance to the store. So again, remember, there's always a different way to do it, and it might not be the way the sighted person does it. It's the way you do it. I cook all the time, and I don't always do things the way a sighted person would do them, but I'm still a very good cook.
I think you touched upon a very important point there. Oftentimes, I don't do certain things because I expect to do it the way I have to do it now, the way I did it before. And if there's more time I'm taking, then I'm not patient with myself. So it's a good thing for the visually impaired to know that they don't have to do things the way sighted people do it, or even another visually impaired. It is okay for you to be different, and it's okay for you to be taking more time, and it's okay for you to be patient with yourself. And I think that's a very good piece of advice. I think I've learned a lot from this podcast, Debbie. Thank you for your time. And I think my biggest takeaway today is that most of the limits are in your head. We can always find a way to break down barriers and reach our destination safely. But we need to be open about it, flexible about it, be patient so that we are able to get to the destination, even if it is taking longer time and it is not the most efficient.
Think out of the box.
Yes. Yes, that's the mantra, I guess. Think out of the box.
Think
Yeah.
out of the box.
Yeah, yeah. Once again, thank you for your time, Debbie. Thank you for coming to our show. And I want to thank the people who are supporting this podcast behind the scene. My partner in crime, Ram Kumar, who is also our production engineer, and my husband, Shankar Venkatraman, who has been a support for producing this podcast. Thank you all, viewers, for listening to it and viewing it. And please put your comments on the channel so that we know how we can improve it. And if you're interested in being part of this whole movement of Braille literacy, please go to www.accessbraille.org and join us in this movement. And thank you once again to all the viewers, and see you until next time.